Right, so I'm just going to press recording so that that is all there. Great, so it is my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, who is Mrs. Juliet Carter, who is the National Director of Autism South Africa. Juliet is a social worker and educator by profession with almost 3 decades in the child protection, education, and corporate training sectors. Juliet is passionate about advocating for the rights of the autistic community, and so is very well suited to be as our first presenter for this session, discussing the child's right to inclusive education. So I would like to hand over to Juliet to start. Thank you. Great.
Thanks. Thank you, Jackie, and welcome everyone. Like Jackie said, I'm the National Director at Autism South Africa, and our eldest daughter is autistic. So we've walked this path and we fought the education system tooth and nail to make sure that her rights are not violated. I'm going to share a presentation with you, so I'm going to put my video off and we'll go through that. There we go. So what we're going to cover today is what inclusive education is, what the rights of the child to a quality education are, and what the rights of an undocumented child are. So first off, inclusive education recognizes the right of all children to feel welcomed in a supportive educational environment in their own community. It refers to the capacity of ordinary local schools and ECD centers to respond to the needs of all learners, including those requiring extra support because of a learning, physical disability, social disadvantage, cultural difference, or other barriers to learning. So inclusive education is not restricted to disabilities, it's any barrier to learning that that child may have. For example, if a child has lost a parent or if a child has gone through quite a traumatic event, that would be considered a barrier to learning as well. I just want to differentiate between mainstream schools and special schools and to explain why we say inclusion does not necessarily mean mainstreaming. A mainstream school is an ordinary neighborhood school that all children attend. It's required to reasonably accommodate children with disabilities, and according to the SAST policy, all children should attend their local neighborhood school first, regardless of their disabilities. The reference to some of these quotes or definitions is at the bottom of each slide. Special schools, on the other hand, are primary and high schools that are equipped to deliver a specialized education program to learners requiring access to highly intensive educational support. Special schools are required to specialize in education for children with specific disabilities. I'm not going to specifically focus on the severe parts. Children should only attend special schools once they've been screened through the SAST policy process at a mainstream school and should only be placed in special schools specializing in the accommodation of their particular disability. And just also to emphasize that these two definitions apply to government schools. We are going to look at the SAST policy later today. I think Lizelle is going to be talking about that. So inclusive education should be based on the individual child and not on the diagnosis. There are autistic children who will thrive in a mainstream classroom if they have the appropriate accommodations and supports. And being a parent of an autistic child, Lindsay did thrive in a mainstream school up to a certain point. But there will always be autistic children who will not thrive in a mainstream classroom and who are going to require highly specialized teaching environments. So, for example, if you are familiar with autistic children and in an autism-specific school, the whole teaching environment is completely different to a mainstream school to cater for the needs of that specific child. So this is why we say inclusion does not equal mainstreaming a child. So inclusion means what is the best possible placement for that child to meet all of the educational needs. So while we cover that, we're going to talk about the rights of the child to quality education. We're going to look at the broad international legal sphere, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26 specifically talks about the right of education for every single person. Article 26 specifically talks about the right to education, and it would be good to get hold of some of these international instruments and go through them in detail as well. right from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, various other instruments were developed. This quote is from the South African Human Rights Commission, and this is the broad framework of the rights to a child to a quality education. I'm going to read it word for word. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Convention on the Rights of a Person with Disabilities, the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, and the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa recognize the right to basic education. The Constitution elevates the status and urgency of this right. It makes the right to basic education immediately realizable. What this means is a child's right to basic education is immediate. It cannot be planned for or postponed with 5-year plans and 10-year plans. It has to be met immediately. And South Africa, you can go through some of the other international instruments here. So South Africa has not exactly signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights because it came out in 1948 before our current government, and the then government refused to sign it because it would hamper with their racist policies and plans. So you can just read that about the child's right to an education. I just want to look at point 3. Parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. So parents also have a right about where or what kind of education the child should receive. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was signed by South Africa in 2007 and ratified in the same year. So when a state signs a treaty, they express the intention to comply with that treaty. It's not binding, but once they ratify a treaty, it becomes a legally binding international law. So South Africa is legally obliged to comply with this convention. So the convention gives the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights feet. So there are quite a few conventions that have come out of the Declaration for Human Rights. A summary of the right to education is in Article 24. States are to ensure equal access to primary and secondary education, vocational training, adult education, and lifelong learning. It doesn't stop at basic education. Education is to employ the appropriate materials, techniques, and forms of communication, and then pupils with support needs are to receive support measures, and this goes into reasonable accommodations and making sure that the child has the correct forms of support in their educational environment. And then the last part of the Article 24, education of persons with disabilities must also foster their participation in society, their sense of dignity and self-worth, and development of their personality, abilities, and creativity. So the whole spectrum of education is to make sure that that person gets a quality education without violating their rights to dignity. The Article 24 goes into a little bit more detail. So Article 24, subpoint 1, education or the right to education for persons with disabilities must be realized without discriminating on that or any sort of discrimination and on the basis of equal opportunity. And the state must ensure an inclusive education system at all levels. So the state has a legal obligation to meet with these requirements. The rest of the subpoints go into a little bit more detail about Braille and the child's right to learn with Braille, so I'm not going to go through those. You can go look at those, and I would really suggest that you get familiar with the legislation. So now we've looked at the huge umbrella, which is your international framework, the UNCRPD and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. South Africa's new constitution was developed with the UDHR in mind. So we had to rewrite our constitution because it did not comply with international law. So our constitution, in the Bill of Rights, everyone, and everyone means everyone, has a right to basic education. It states that everyone has a right to a basic education, including adult basic education and to further education, which the state through reasonable measures shall make progressively available and accessible. So you can see basic education is immediately realizable, whereas further education and other training must be made progressively available. This picture has just spoke volumes to me. So we've got this overarching umbrella legislation, and there's an adult carrying the child. So it's our responsibility to ensure that children's rights are not violated and that we do everything in our power to ensure that they do have the education that they're entitled to. Furthermore, in Section 9 of the Constitution, the state may not unfairly discriminate directly or indirectly against anyone on any of those grounds, and may not discriminate directly or indirectly against anyone on one or more of the grounds in terms of subsection 3. So basically, no discrimination. Now, if we put this into practice, you've got the Constitution. Now, to give the Constitution feet, other laws were put into place, like the Children's Act and the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act. We call it PEPUDA for short. So PEPUDA gives Section 9 of the Constitution feet. It's to prevent and prohibit unfair discrimination and harassment, to promote equality and eliminate unfair discrimination, and to prevent and prohibit hate speech. In practice, turning away a learner on account of their disability is discrimination. It's illegal. PEPUDA states that discrimination occurs when reasonable accommodation is not provided. Accordingly, children and persons with disabilities should not be discriminated against in their access to basic education and further education. So parents and practitioners need to know the legislation to know that if a child's turned away because they're wearing diapers, that is blatant discrimination. If a child's turned away because the school doesn't cater for a specific disability, that is discrimination. The South African Schools Act now gives feet to the right to the child to basic education. Education is compulsory for all children between the ages of 7 and 15, or in the year that they complete grade 9. This also applies to children with disabilities. A child is a child. So a child between the ages of 7 and 15 logically includes a child with a disability. In addition, all public schools must. So in legislation, may means the government can decide if they want to or not. Legislation where the word must comes into play is mandatory. It means you have to do this. You can't choose to do it or not. It is a legal mandate of the state to provide these services. So all public schools must admit learners and serve educational needs without unfairly discriminating in any way. Provide education for learners with special education needs in ordinary public schools. Provide relevant educational support services to such learners, and ensure physical facilities at public schools are accessible to disabled learners. There's no such thing as may, it is must. Furthermore, the South African Schools Act states that a public school must admit learners and serve their educational requirements without discriminating in any way. That's Section 5. And Section 5, subsection 6, in determining the placement of a learner with special education needs, the head of department and principal must take into account the rights and wishes of the parents of such learners. So here you can see the parents also, their needs and wishes also need to be taken into account. It doesn't say may or let's think about it. It explicitly says must. And then just looking at some of the policies. So policies are not laws, they're not enforceable, which is a great pity. But the White Paper 6, I'm saying this past tense because White Paper 6 came to an end during 2021. White Paper 6 gave effect to the Schools Act. It attempted to remedy the segregated education system inherited from the apartheid governments. It hoped to build an inclusive education system within 20 years of its implementation, which was last year. And it is based on the principles of non-discrimination and the human dignity of all children. And another policy that works with White Paper 6 is SAST. This policy is about implementing White Paper 6. It's screening, identification, and assessment of the support of children. Inclusive education is not just about children with disabilities, but anyone who experiences barriers to learning. That's explicitly stated in the SAST policy. And we're not going to cover that too much. Now, that particular part will be covered by Lizelle. And that's an overview of a child's rights to education in South Africa. I'm going to add 2 documents. Sorry, there's one more part.
Okay.
The rights of an undocumented child. We're not going to go into too much detail. In the chat box, I'm going to put the judgment and the circular that came out based on the class action case in the Eastern Cape. But basically, based on the court case, a child with no documents must be admitted to a school. But you can read that for yourself, and that's another whole 20 minutes or half an hour discussion as well. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Juliet, for a fantastic start to this afternoon. Lots of questions popping up in the chat box, but I we're going to continue with the presentations and then get through as many questions as possible at the end of each of the presentations at the end. So I'm going to now introduce our second speaker for this afternoon, who is Mrs. Gloria Gkikas, who is a speech, language and hearing therapist, as well as a counseling psychologist. Gloria has been working at Autism South Africa since 2015 as a parent counsellor, and her role is to support the family as well as the children on who've been diagnosed on the spectrum. So Gloria is now going to be discussing more of the administrative processes that are involved with placing a child in a school and those challenges that might be encountered. And so thank you so much, Gloria, for being with us today, and I hand over to you.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for this opportunity. I just want to say that at SA Autism, we get lots of inquiries for placement. So it's almost a daily thing with us. And I just want to point out that the policies or governing laws that Juliet has just gone through are very important. If you're working in the field of education or health, these policies are very important and one should have them to hand. So just to iterate, the Constitution is our governing law. In it is the human rights or the Bill of Rights, and in it is the right to education. And articulated in all this is the South African Schools Act. And so understanding those are your supportive documents that you should use in referencing when you're looking at the process of admission to schools. So I want to just start by explaining the educational stream. I know that I don't have a lot of time. In South Africa, our education system is divided into two streams. We have what we call the mainstream, and we have what we call the learners with special educational need, or ALSEN stream. And so both are important to understand, because often people relate only to the mainstream and they fail to understand that if a child's having certain difficulty learning problems, or they still need to be educated. It's their primary right. So, and then they can be slotted into the ALSEN stream. Just quickly, the mainstream comprises of your academic route and your skills or vocational route. Okay, what makes a child more suited for the mainstream? In the past, they used more IQ assessment. So if you were deemed to be of an average IQ, you followed a mainstream. And any child with a medical diagnosis or a barrier to learning was placed into the ALSEN stream. It is a very gray line as to how these decisions are arrived at, and therefore sometimes it is important to understand that not every child with a medical condition should be excluded from mainstream. Now, having said that, I'm just going to quickly go through the ALSEN stream, because it's going to be my focus as to how the process of admitting a child to a special school happen. So the ALSEN stream can be divided into three different segments itself. So that would be your specialized school, where the child can actually follow a mainstream curriculum, but with support in a supported environment. So that would be, in the past, was mainly children with cerebral palsy. They went to cerebral palsy school and they followed mainstream, but were supported because of their physical challenges. Then you would have what we now refer to as special schools. These are a wide range of conditions where children who are not coping in the mainstream are then put into these. And that could be children who have Down syndrome and other conditions. And the third segment of the ALSEN stream is the NGO or NPO, what we call stimulation centers. These are children with severe to profound conditions that impair them to such an extent that they could not be successfully integrated in the other two streams of the ALSEN, other two segments of the ALSEN stream. Now, how do you get a child into these streams? All entry-level admissions must be done through the Department of Education, whether it's through to the mainstream or the Autism stream. The difference is that in the mainstream, grade 1 admissions or grade R admissions are done mostly online and are open only at a certain period in the year, and that's usually broadcasted and announced. Whereas admission to Autism stream, all 3 segments can happen throughout the year as the child is diagnosed. And this is based a lot or the biggest challenge in admitting children throughout the year is availability of space. And one can challenge it through those supportive laws that we spoke about, so that government creates more and that there's always space. But the reality is that there are waiting lists and there are long periods of waiting to admit a child with a diagnosis into a specialized or special school. So you would then take documentation to the department. If it's an Autism school, you would have to go personally to the department and submit the documents. And the documents that are important are the birth certificate, the Road to Health card, both parents' ID, the proof of residence, medical reports, particularly the diagnostic report. And if the child has attended speech and OT, the speech and OT reports are also important. And then any other relevant information that might assist in deciding the best placement for that child. So these documents are submitted to the department, and the parent then has to wait. The challenge often is that they wait between 3 to 6 months or a year, or they come to us and say, I haven't heard from the school and the child is still at home. What is it that we can do? We can tell them the child has a right to education, but they quickly return and say, well, the child's on the waiting list and we're waiting for availability. So that's a continuous response that we're having to deal with. I must also say that the birth certificate is an important document. The South African Schools Act says no child shall be admitted into a public school without a birth certificate. And obviously it's something that goes on all the time. And that case that Juliet just spoke about in the Eastern Cape is a landslide breakthrough in this sentiment, because a lot of our foreign national children are undocumented, so and don't have a birth certificate. Then the Road to Health card. The South African Schools Act also clearly articulates that no child shall be admitted into a public environment without having completed all those vaccines. And I know that at SA Autism, there was a time we went through a period where parents were actively refusing to have the BCGs and other vaccines, but because they said for some unknown reason felt that it was a trigger for autism. I must also quickly add that that was disproved. So the law does want, the South African Schools Act does want that all children must have completed their vaccination schedules. The proof of residence is important because the South African Schools Act says a child shall be admitted to a school closest to where he lives or closest to where the parents work. So they have to provide reasonable proof that the school that their child can be allocated to is closest to where they live. And I really do see how that helps, because often parents want a school of choice that is very far from where they live. And 1 year, things seem to go well. The second year, there's a whole lot of challenges that they come across. Either the parents have moved work, and they can no longer drop the child, or there's problems with transport, or the child's behavior is challenging in the transport. There's been various things. And the end result is that that child can actually miss school and stay home and eventually be deregistered. And I'm sure that Lizelle will actually speak around that issue. So that's why proof of residence is often a very important document to provide. Now, OT and speech reports are important because if the child was already receiving speech and OT before, which often is the case, before they actually start school, they would have been receiving it at the community health center. I think it just makes sense that with the report, the next therapist that would be working with the child must know what has been done and what programs need to be continued, or what communication system the child was placed on to continue on that. So just the continuity of therapy services is important through that OT and speech report. So I know I can talk the whole day, but there's so much time limit. I also want to say that when parents are presenting these documents to the district, they do not often speak to the person who is in charge of the placement. They speak to an admin person at front desk, and they never take note whom they submitted the documents to. And the problem arises that they said, I gave the documents and we cannot trace them because they're not sure who they were given to. The second thing is that the information that they have provided completing, I know there's a lot of changes in contact details of parents, but often parents will come to our office and says, Gloria, I haven't heard from the department, and I phoned the department with all righteous indignation, and they say, but Gloria, tell me the name of the child, and they quickly track, and they said, on this day, there was space at this school for this child. We tried to contact the parent on these contact details. We couldn't raise them. We do not have staff that sit at the desk and continue to phone one parent the whole day. So again, the idea that parents must keep in touch and have a relationship with that district is very important. Now, because the South African Schools Act says the child shall attend school closest to where you live, I often refer the child to the district closest to where they live. But I often also say that, where do you work? And they're saying, I work in another area. And I say, well, just submit both applications. Submit applications to both districts and see which one will come through with space the first, rather than just waiting on the one district. Another problem would be, or what we should really look at, is parents don't often provide sufficient information to make placement more fluid and easier to handle. And sometimes it's a language problem, I can understand, but often it's, I'm just not sure whether the administrative side from GDE don't take this seriously, but there's often parents or the documents are mislaid, or the child is displaced to another school, and the reason is there wasn't place at this school, and then the parent finds themselves with the similar problems of transportation. And I'm sure you would appreciate that transporting or keeping a child with autism for hours on end in a confined space of a taxi can be very challenging for anyone. Okay, I just want to say, yeah.
I'm so sorry. Like I said to all the speakers beforehand, I feel terrible. We could actually give each one of them a whole session, because it's just all these issues that have been raised are so important and do need to be discussed. But Gloria, if I may respectfully stop you now, just so that we can get through the other two speakers, and then we can come back and highlight any other points at the end, or with the question and answer time, if that's okay.
Yes, sorry about that. Well,
no.
There's just so much to say that one does. Can I just quickly mention some of the main questions that parents will take by a few seconds? A lot of parents come to us and they said, what grade is my child in? Is my child passing or failing at an Elson school? I mean, are they passed? Did they pass the year, or are they failing? Does my child get OT and speech at that school? And when do they actually take my child for speech therapy? I'm hoping that Lizelle will cover some of these answers in her presentation. And then other most concerning question is, will my child become independent of us one day? Will he be able to work and support himself? And what is the lifespan of a person with a medical condition? Will they outlive us? So those are some, and if anyone were to put up answers to them, and or in their work with parents, address these, it will help a lot. Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you so much, Gloria. So appreciate of your time and being with us today. Thank you for that excellent, very short synopsis of what happens during the administration process, which is so important and often does come with its own challenges. So thank you, Gloria. I'm going to move on next to Lizelle de Nobrega, who is waiting in the sidelines. Thank you, Lizelle, for joining us today. Lizelle is the head of occupational therapy at the Johannesburg School for Autism and has many years of experience in and treating children on the spectrum. So Lizelle is now going to follow on from Gloria, and she's going to be discussing some of the processes that happen once the child is placed at the autistic school. So thank you so much, Lizelle.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to try, let's see here, and share my screen. Sorry, what's happening? Here we go. If you can just let me know, Jackie, can you see that?
It's starting at you are sharing. I think it's just loading up.
Yeah. With the network and
yes.
all these things. These things take time. Let me I can start talking.
There we go. It's on. Thank
you.
Oh,
is it on?
Yes, super.
So I'm Lizelle, and I work for the Johannesburg School for Autism. I have been there for now, I think it's going on 13 years. And funnily enough, in terms of placement, a lot of things have actually changed. Up until, I'll never forget, it was 2016, schools used to do placement all on their own. So parents used to come directly to the school. Some didn't have diagnoses, some did, but they weren't by medical doctors, so psychiatrists or neurodevelopmental pediatricians. It was maybe a therapist or something like that. And we used to do everything from our side. From helping them to get a diagnosis to getting all the documents. We had our own waiting lists. Everything was done by the schools. In 2016, it was taken over by the district offices. And I will say that in some ways, I know for our school, it actually, yeah, it's been interesting, let's put it that way, because at least when we were in control of the entire process, there were certain things. Yes, there was a long waiting list, but in terms especially of communication between the school and parents and where they are on the waiting list and things like that, documents didn't get lost, all of those sorts of things. So there are pros and cons kind of either way. So just to, I'm going to, like it's been mentioned today, we could all speak for a really long time. I'm going to try and keep it as brief as possible. So just to let you know specifically, I think Jackie is going to cover, there are a few differences in the private sector, but from the government sector perspective, the CS process is always followed in terms of the documentation that is goes between the districts and the schools and head office. And my next slide, I'll go more into the CS process. What happens, Gloria has already mentioned a bit of this, but just so that you know exactly kind of where we pick up at the school level is, as it was mentioned, parents or caregivers apply to the district in which they live or work. What happens is if they, for example, want their child to go to another school, they still apply to the district in which they live. All the documentation, everything gets done at that district, and the papers, once the ALSN number has been given, the papers then get transferred to the district in which the school is that they're in. But at the end of the day, they have to go to the district that they live in or that they work in. A very important thing, Gloria did mention with all the documents that have to be handed in government in particular, absolute essential is that they have to have the primary diagnosis of autism made by a medical doctor. So it can't be a psychologist, educational psychologist, speech therapist, OT, any of those things. It has to be a medical doctor. They never turn down, let's put it that way, diagnoses made maybe by GPs, but we very seldom get diagnoses made by GPs. But like I say, either way, they wouldn't turn it down. It's just that it obviously is preferable if it's a professional that has specific specialization in neurodevelopmental disorders. And then what happens is that relevant, whichever district it is, they gather all the documents, they send them to head office. That's also why it's a bit of a process, and why things can go missing is because documents don't stay in one place. They literally either physically get taken or get emailed. So there's various people, there's about 3 different levels that have to sign off on the applications. So they go from the district office, the case manager, the district director signs off. It then goes to head office, gets signed off by somebody there, and then gets sent back to the district. Each learner then gets issued with what's called an ALSN number, so learner with special education needs number. And that has, with autism specifically, the beginning of the number will have the district, it has the year, then it has a random number, and then the end actually ends with ASD. So it shows you their diagnosis in the ALSN number. And only once all of that has been done, does that file or that case, all of those documents get sent from the district to the relevant school. To then screen and see if there is space available and things like that. So at the end of every month, the school does provide stats to the district in terms of spaces we have in total, but also in what age groups and levels of support, because that's obviously very important. And I'll go into that a little bit more just now. So one of the things just to mention here, we often have parents coming directly to the school. Well, we have parents come directly to the school, and we tell them obviously that they can't apply directly to the school, and so we refer them to our nearest our district that we fall under, or then we have the details of all of the districts in Gauteng, and so we'll ask them kind of where they live and then try and find the area that they live in. We actually keep little cards, looks like little business cards, so that we can give it to them with the contact details for that district. What also sometimes happens is parents will phone, or they will arrive at the school and say that they handed all their documents into the district, and we're told that the child will be placed at our school and they haven't heard from us. And in that case, we have to tell them, you know what I mean, we need to follow up, because if we have not received the file, we cannot admit them. We cannot book them for a screening. We cannot do anything. We are the end of the road kind of thing. Literally, we're the last step. Okay, then just to go into a little bit of the SAST that you've heard us talking about. Juliet mentioned it, and I think Gloria mentioned it. SAST stands for Screening, Identification, Assessment and Support. And it is a framework, and it's an entire policy. You are welcome to look it up. It is an entire manual. There are many, many, many pages. So obviously can't go in depth into it. But basically, it's a framework that is used nationally to identify and assess children or learners with special needs or that require additional support, and to provide programs for those learners so that they can participate in schooling to the best of their ability and get a quality education that is tailored to their needs. And that's the aim, obviously, is to improve access to education for those that experience barriers to learning. Juliet mentioned when we say barriers to learning, it doesn't actually only mean those with special needs, but that's obviously what we're focusing on more so today. The CS policy in terms of there's certain documents. Yes.
Sorry, I just want to interrupt. Our screen isn't moving on with your slides, because I see you on slide 3 and we're still on, oh wait, sorry, it is on the, oh my apologies, it is on the main screen. Sorry.
Is it? Are you sure?
Yes, yeah. It was moving down the side. I didn't see it moving on the main one. Sorry about that.
Just not in presenter view. Oh,
yes.
there we
Okay,
go.
perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, there. Can you see it?
Yes.
Cool.
Great, thanks, Lizelle.
No worries. So there's certain documents in the CS policy that are used, forms that are filled out, And those are used whether it is a first-time admission. So if the child is maybe 3 or 4 and sitting at home and they go to the district office, there's certain documents that are used anyway. But then also if the child is already in a school, whether it is a special needs school or a mainstream school where they were maybe struggling, then there are documents that are used as well within the CS policy to transfer to another school. And like I said, this is very much within the government sector. It's not used in the private sector. And then just a few kind of key terms or phrases or acronyms, because there's many things, like I say, within the CS policy. Important things to know of is what's called the school-based support team. So if a learner is in a school, whether it is a mainstream or remedial MID school, so a school for moderate intellectual disability, or even what ASD specific schools are categorized under SID schools, so it's severe intellectual disability. There is documentation, it's called a support needs assessment, and that gets filled out by a teacher in terms of the challenges that the learner is experiencing, what support they need within those areas, and also intervention that the teacher has already tried or is going to try. Right, and the teacher then draws up what is called an individual support plan, and that is very, very important within all special needs to meet the needs of that learner. And that could be anything, there could be strategies there in terms of differentiating curriculum or getting OT, speech therapy, things like that. The school-based support team then consists of obviously the teacher, any team members, so the multidisciplinary team that works with that learner. And although we say it's school-based, it obviously also includes the parents. Everything is done obviously in communication and in conjunction with the parents. If the school and the school-based support team, the teacher, we've tried to remediate and put in all sorts of measures and interventions in the individual support plan. We have a follow-up date. We're going to try this. If it gets to a time where it's seen where, okay, you know what I mean, the things that we have tried to implement are not helping and we feel the learner we need more support, the case is then referred to the district-based support team. And there's also various documentation. There's a process within the CS policy that is followed to do that, to approach the district-based support team to then help with further intervention. In some cases, and I have found, so I'm going to speak particularly from my experience, I can't talk for others, that support usually actually comes in the form of a transfer. If the child, for example, like really just because they aren't outside service or they aren't services necessarily that the district can provide that the school isn't already providing, because I mean, of course, we're set up specifically for autism. We have all the therapies and all that type of thing. This process is also followed if parents are relocating and just want to be transferred to another ASD specific school purely because they're going to be moving. But yeah, I've given you like a 3 minutes on CS policy. It is a very interesting document to look into, and it encompasses a broad range of things that can be done and processes that should be followed. And where they are followed, they do work. It just does take time. I suppose the cogs in the system take time to turn. The CS policy, just to mention, what's nice about it is that it also uses and categorizes needs, let's say support needs, also based on high, medium, and low support needs. And so that's very much in keeping in terms with autism and how we also categorize support needs. So that works quite well. And they also apply that, if you want to say categorization, according to schools. So obviously, I think Gloria had mentioned, or actually Juliet had mentioned, that there are some learners who possibly are on the spectrum, but they have very low support needs. So it doesn't mean that just because they have autism, they need to go to an autism specific school. They would be able to cope possibly in mainstream or in remedial, for example. But all of that depends on the assessment and the screening of the learner to see, you know what I mean, how much support they need. Yeah. Then just to let you know, once we receive the files at the school level, we receive the files, we contact the parents. Usually we should have all the documents. A lot of the times we don't. So we let the parents know to bring the outstanding documents with them when they come. We tell the parents, we call it a mini assessment because they don't necessarily always understand what the word screening means. And when they come at our school, but I know most schools follow this, whether it's a therapist or a team. So at our school, it's a therapist and a teacher. We'll meet with the parent or parents, whoever comes, and the learner. We do get some background from parents. We don't spend a lot of time on background in the past, but definitely also get some collateral in terms of how the child is doing at home, whether it's in terms of communication, their independent skills, those type of things, because we know that a lot of times our kiddies, they come to the screening and it's a brand new environment. They've never met us, and so they're not necessarily going to engage with us and do with us what they do at home, where they're comfortable and there isn't change. So we do also get some collateral from the parents, and then we actually just informally, we literally play with the child. It depends obviously on their age, but we have a variety of things, but we do it more informally. The types of things that we do look at, obviously, is their chronological age, and I'll go into a little bit that obviously is a consideration, and then their communication, whether it's expressive, receptive, just, in general, their independent skills. So we're talking very basics. We do try and find out in terms of toileting, how independent are they, things like dressing and feeding themselves. That's really just kind of the three main ones that we look at. We do ask if they have specific sensory challenges or needs or, things that they get quite overwhelmed with, things like that. And then I put in inverted commas as academic skills. What I mean is we do look then at, for example, shapes, colors, letters, that type of more, concept development related things. And then from all of that, we literally just spend, I'd say it depends on the family, but maybe about half an hour, 40 minutes with the learner and their family or whoever's brought them through, to try and then determine which class we would place them in if we do have space. And
Lizelle,
basically our classroom.
Lizelle,
yes.
I'm so sorry. I'm gonna need to stop you because I have to give Jackie her time as well.
Oh, cool. No worries.
I'm so sorry. We definitely need to have a part 2 and a part 3 of this this webinar because there is just so much to cover and it's so difficult to get.
That was the most important.
Thank you, Lizelle. No, that was super.
No worries.
Thank you so much. Yeah, just with the time remaining of our webinar, I want to introduce our last speaker for today, who is Jackie Selley, who is a qualified occupational therapist with a special interest in autism spectrum disorder. She is also the therapy director and principal at the Center for Autism Research and Education, which is otherwise known as CARE, and which is located in Johannesburg. So Jackie is now going to be discussing some of the practical points of school placement for children with autism coming from the private sector. I just want to clarify for everyone, Jackie and I do share a name, and Jackie, you are coming up as Jackie Bezuidenhout. Because that's why we couldn't find you in the waiting room. Jackie has used my link to come on, but that is Jackie Selley. And yeah, so thank you so much, Jackie, for being with us today.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to discuss private autism-specific schooling in South Africa. This is based on my experience because there isn't really a standardized approach to assessment and screening in the private schools, the private school setting. So as I said, there's no standardized process. I've worked in a number of government and private schools that cater for children with autism over the years. And the process has been different between each of the private schools that I've worked with. Generally, they don't need a diagnosis to access a private school. So what we're seeing is that the school may accommodate various diagnoses that primarily require intervention in terms of communication, sensory needs, social support, and they require visual structure. So we do see a lot of mixed diagnoses at private schools. So it wouldn't only be children diagnosed with autism. The diagnosis is not important, rather it is the school looks at, can we meet the needs of the presenting symptoms or the needs of the learner. We follow a similar class placement to what Lizelle has discussed. So we look at whether a child is educable in a small group, and we accommodate all behaviors. So that is a requirement at the school that I'm at, that the child has to be able to cope within a small group, meaning 2 to 3 learners. We are not able to cope with we're not a facility that offers one-on-one treatment. And then we will look at the age range of where a child could fit in. So in our classes, we generally have a 3-year age range, the level of support required, and then how much space is available. In our classes, we have 5 to 9 children in a class with a teacher and 2 or 3 assistants. So the process of acceptance to the school, we'll get a call or email, and then we will book a screening. And the screening follows the same structure as Lizelle has discussed in the informal or mini assessment. We'll look at the communication skills, the sensory needs, the developmental level of the child, where they are in terms of their activities of daily living, their concept development, and then we'll sit and discuss with the parents. We'll get a brief background history. At this time, because it is a private school, the school fees and therapy fees will be discussed, and I'll go into this a bit later. From this point, the school can then decide whether the placement is suitable for the learner. We do have children who come for screenings, and they are either too low support or too high support for my school to meet their needs. So then we'll refer them to a more appropriate placement. Generally, we do accept children into our more formal assessment process, and at CARE it's a 10-day assessment done by a speech therapist, occupational therapist, and a teacher. The child will be in the classroom and we'll observe them within various settings, and then you'll book a feedback with the parents and form the IDP or the ISP, and then they'll be placed and continue their progress in the school. So in terms of funding for private autism schools, they generally self-funded by parents, and the therapy portion is not covered by the school fees. It's a separate cost. It may be partially covered by medical aids, but this differs between schemes and levels within the different medical aids. There's no standardized cost for private schools. They charge various amounts. So within the different schools that I've worked in, it's been a very different range of fees that are charged. But therapy is billed in a standard manner as guided by the HPCSA. So when looking at a private school, there's certain things that have come up in terms of what parents should look for or should look at. We want holistic treatment that involves the parent as part of a MDT, multidisciplinary team, with a speech therapist, OT, educators, psychologist, physio. They should either be based at the school or they should have regular visits at the school. It's better if they're based at the school, but this is not always possible. The school should offer a curriculum individualized within the IEP, and the IEP should be developed by the team, including the learner and their parents, as informed by the primary areas of need, level of support, and interests of the learner. And this is what's being done in your public sector as well. It should be a school where the parents feel comfortable and where the school is affordable. There are some schools where the parents have to sell their car, mortgage their house to be able to afford the school. Then that isn't in the best interest of the family, which means it probably isn't in the best interest of the learner. When the child joins the school, the parent is joining a school community. So we feel that there should be both support from within the school and from the parent body itself. There should be group learning and supported social interaction with peers, no harmful interventions. The school shouldn't offer what's impossible, and there should be positive behavioral support. So these are just my experiences in terms of the private schooling sector. Autism. Thank you, short and sweet.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And thank you to all of our speakers for giving such fantastic insight into their specialized area as to where they are in assisting with the placement of children in the education system. So we do have a couple of minutes for some questions. I know questions have been coming through on the chat group. Kirsty, I think you've also been keeping tabs as to which ones have been answered and on the chat group, or ones that we want to present now to the speakers.
I think in our last few minutes, I wonder if it would be helpful, even if they've been answered in the chat, whether it would just be worth having the conversation about the age point. So Alicia asks, what age can we refer our patients from Department of Education to the Department of Health to the Department of Education district office to start with the school placement process? Recent feedback from some district officers that they can only refer when they turn 6. This will result in them only being placed on waiting lists at that point and likely waiting at least another year to get placement. So I think this is a problem that all of us face, and it is a transition from a previous system where we've referred children as early as 2 so that they got onto the waiting list and were, and in order to get there on time. But my understanding is that the Department of Education now prioritizes assessments in the year before the children go to school. So typically, so we put referrals through
that.
Yes, go for it.
So just to say, it depends on the different schools, I will say. So the Joburg School for Autism specifically, we admit learners from the age of 3. But I do know that years back, our principal actually applied for that to happen. Most of the autism specific schools take the kids from at least the age of 5. But I will say we've had referrals before where they have come to us at the age already of maybe 2.5, and then we've just, like you say, if you want to say, not put them on an official waiting list, but we've made sure that a space would be kept for them literally for the month that they turn 3, because legally we can only we would take them younger if we could. I don't know though, I do suppose I've been working with my district for so long that I know how they work, and I know that they definitely would. I find it concerning that some districts are telling parents that they only, do placement from the age of 6, because I agree, then there's a waiting list, so the kid isn't even getting into school at the age of 6. And even then, we know early intervention is best. So I do think possibly sometimes it's parents not knowing their rights. I think in the sense that the best thing would be if they would actually push back, the districts that don't have it, as long as there are schools that take children younger, especially with autism, because they can't do, for example, an EdPsych assessment and things like that. It's up to, if the school has space for that age, I definitely know that is a possibility.
I think that my experience, like yours, is that it's not only it differs between districts, it differs between schools, and it differs between cities. and so I think the answer is to learn your district and your city to some extent, which makes it very difficult that there isn't a standardized system. Yeah. But I think the point with the department, with the standard Department of Education approaches, which has been very much that they prioritize children who are of kind of official school going age, as in they are legally obliged to make some accommodation for them. So they assess, they make sure that they prioritize the children for assessment who are within that age range or just before. And so we don't see much advantage in our system or we don't see kids being assessed much younger than age 5 in our system. And the schools are prioritizing children of school going age because that's what the government has asked them to do. So of course it's not necessarily the best thing for individual children, but it's kind of how the system is currently working. I don't know if anybody else would like to add anything to that.
I think Gloria wants to add something.
Okay.
I just wanted to say that, and Jackie, you know this, that as soon as the child has diagnosed between the ages of 2 and 3, we set the process in place for school admission immediately. And some schools might have an ECD program attached. I know that, or closer to the school that the child can join, but it's so important that as soon as there is a diagnosis, that school placement must be sought immediately and not wait for the age of 5 or any age. As soon as there's a medical diagnosis, the school placement must be facilitated.
So, I mean, I think this also speaks to, so because we all have such different experiences in different parts of the country, this is a very relevant conversation to be having. And I think it speaks to the importance of doctors who are working in the field and people in the Department of Health in the field, making sure that lines of communication with the Department of Education, district officers and individuals is as open as possible, because it is clear that the systems are not working in a uniform way across the different areas of the country, and we have to do what the system speaks to in our different areas. To try and get the best for the kids. Anything more from you, Jackie, on that?
No, I'm just looking to see if there's any other pressing questions that maybe we address before I see we are over time, but I've been told that we can carry on a little bit longer, just because we had so much to jam pack into 1 hour. I'm just seeing that someone has asked, Humela, is there a monitoring system or body for the private schools? I'm not sure if, Jackie, if you would like to respond to that.
Yeah, so private schools have to be registered with the Department of Education as independent schools. So we are under the umbrella. However, there is very little monitoring in terms of my experience from the Department of Education. They ask for certain statistics, but in terms of monitoring anything about the quality or there's very little input from the Department of Education. And there isn't a group, like a private body group that monitors autism-specific schools in Gauteng or in South Africa.
Super. Thanks, Jackie.
I think we're going to wrap it up. This stimulated a lot of discussion. It's a pressing problem that we all deal with. Jackie, do you want to have the last words?
Okay, well, thanks, Kirsty. And a massive thank you to our fantastic speakers with all of their expertise for being with us this afternoon. And thank you to all of you for joining us to take part in this first webinar for SA Child. Thank you to Kirsty for helping with the questions. And a big thank you also to the other SA Child exec members who've been helping behind the scenes, specifically Gillian Saluji and Helena Makura, who have been amazing with the putting together the Zoom and helping with the website and answering the email. So a big thank you, Helena, and to Gillian. And I just want to say that this is the first SA Child webinar for this year, but there's another one coming next month on the 11th of May. Also Wednesday, same time at 4 o'clock till 5 o'clock. And we're going to be discussing another important topic, which is going to be looking at toilet training in children with special needs. So please do look for that being advertised and register for that webinar as well. And thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.